Good morning. Very glad to be here with all of you as we continue to study the Gospel of Matthew together. This morning in the Gospel of Matthew, and ready for verse 16, Matthew chapter 11 and verse 16. Now, Matthew 11:16 comes on the heels of Jesus' praise for John the Baptizer, saying that none have been born of women who are greater than John the Baptist. And he uses John the Baptizer as a representative of the period of the law of Moses, saying in verse 13 that all the prophets and the law prophesied until John. And this is why John the Baptizer is heralded, which is not to say that he has a greater substantive value than Jesus, as some have here suggested. But he is holding up John the Baptizer as a figure in order to show the kingdom of heaven, the new covenant that would come through him in even sharper relief. And says then in verse 16, changing the scope from John to the people, to what should I compare this generation? So those that were there to hear and witness John, remember that he says in verse 12, from the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven has been suffering violence, and the violent have been seizing it by force. I suggested to you that the days of John the Baptist in verse 12 encompasses more than just the period of time in which John was working, since John is here viewed as a figure of the period of the law of Moses as a whole, and that the violence suffered in question here is the violence that has been done against the prophets of the law of Moses all throughout the history of Israel. And now you have the culminating prophet, John the Baptist, working among these people. They had created a hedge around the law of Moses in order to prevent themselves from encroaching on the law of Moses, and yet they were guilty of rejecting John the same way that their forefathers had been guilty of rejecting the prophets that had come to them, which is why his attention now shifts from not John, but to this generation, the people of his present age. He says that this generation is like children sitting in the marketplaces who call out to other children, we played the flute for you, but you didn't dance. We sang a lament, but you didn't mourn. So what's the contrast going on here? Remember that contrasts, paradoxes, wordplay are key prominent features of Hebrew logic, writing, everything in that respect. And so we have the celebratory flute alongside the funeral dirge. There have been reasons to rejoice, and there have been reasons to lament, heralded by the prophets in previous times and by John in the present age. What would be the reason for rejoicing at the message of John in the present age? The kingdom of heaven is at hand, right? The realization of the Old Testament prophecies is coming to fruition in this day and age, speaking of the contemporaries of Jesus and John. Remember that in the Gospel of John, John the Apostle records John the Baptizer heralding Jesus when he sees him approaching, behold, the Lamb of God that takes away the sin of the world. That is very good reason to rejoice. What reason then could there be for lamenting? The rejection, right? So if there are those that hear the news and accept the news that John is bringing, there is reason to rejoice. But by nature, everyone else is excluded and therefore has reason to lament. So Jesus compares the present generation to a group of children. It's funny that children are always the ones that want to be the most grown, right? I heard a 12-year-old talking one time and they said, "Oof, I feel old." Of course, compared to a 2-year-old, it's 6 times their age. But those that have lived longer have a deeper appreciation of what aging means, and present company excluded. So he compares the generation that he is among to children. They thought of themselves as having a very keen awareness and insight. They weren't like those previous generations. They were much more mature than them. They would not make the same mistakes that their forefathers had made. So Jesus, in a very simple analogy here, highlights the immaturity and the lack of awareness on the part of the religious elite in Judea, and also the response to what they've heard. They have heard the flutes for rejoicing. They have heard the dirges being sung, but they did not respond appropriately to either one, and instead were indifferent or unaware. Jesus begins the next verse, "For John came neither eating nor drinking," right? The "for" there, much like "therefore," tells us that what follows is an application of the logic that was laid out before. The logic laid out before is that this generation are like children that played flutes and sung dirges, but neither sang nor lamented. And he says, this is the case because John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say he has a demon. Jesus goes further than that and says the Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, look, a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. Now, we don't want to read too much into the fact here that he says John was neither eating nor drinking, that the Son of Man was eating and drinking. We talked about this at length in the Psalms, right? That if you have two opposites, that what is meant are those things and what else? Everything in between, right? So John came. Of course, he ate and drank because he was alive. We didn't have zombie John coming in out of the wilderness, but he was not eating, drinking in their presence. He wasn't eating, drinking a meal that they would want. He was less familiar to the people, and they said he has a demon. The Son of Man came, he ate with tax collectors, with prostitutes, and we see what kind of a response he received. Read Luke chapter 7 and the parable of the two debtors to see what the response was to Jesus eating and drinking with the common, unaccepted people. And they say that he is a glutton and a drunkard. The contrast here, right, is whether you do or don't, the opponents, the naysayers, will have something to say. And I've told y'all my pessimist hunting dog joke before. You'll have to fill in the blank there. But that's the thing, is there are always going to be people that have something negative, a negative way to respond, regardless of what they are given. And they were given here the one that had come to make straight the way of the Lord and the Son of Man himself. And they rejected both of them, which will lead to verse 21. I do want to make a slight aside here just to note the fact that once again Jesus is referring to himself as the Son of Man. What we'll find through a reading of the Gospels is that Son of Man is the most common expression that Jesus uses to refer to himself. And I think that this is to highlight his humanity. He is truly the Son of God, but he claims being the Son of Man more frequently than he does being the Son of God, because he came to be like his brethren in all things. Hebrews 2, Hebrews 4. Okay, any questions, comments, anything anyone has before we move on to verse 20? All right, so we read, then he proceeded to denounce the towns where most of his miracles were done because they did not repent. Now, this is a parenthetical note that is given to us by Matthew here, but there, I think, is a lesson that we can take from this. I've heard people lament before, oh, if only we could perform miracles, then people would believe. Well, what were they doing in the first century? Performing miracles. And what were the people doing? Not believing. Okay? Jesus casts out demons, and they say he casts out demons by the ruler of demons, right? It's easy to think that because we're missing something that we read others possessing, that we are in a somehow inferior position. But I think that sometimes that lends itself to a dismissive attitude. That, well, because I don't possess the ability to perform miracles, and a miracle is what it would take for these people to believe, there's no really point in me trying. It becomes a very reasonable way of making an excuse, a justification, a rationalization for ourselves. Angela?
The miracle it couldn't be done in front of them for them to believe. It would have to be done on them for them to believe. And it's like there's some people that even if the miracle happens on them, they would still not believe.
Yeah. Well, I think there you mean, right, that it would take divine intervention, not just the restoration of their flesh or whatever, but divine intervention to reach in and alter them. And of course, that's not how this works, right? We're made with free will for a reason. But whenever, in our study of the book of Acts, we saw frequently the appeal that Paul made in the synagogues was based in reason, logic, in proving the scriptures. And Paul was able to perform miracles, but that was still the tact that he chose in how to convey the gospel. Heather?
I just wanted to say, I always thought it was, performing miracles like when they, came to arrest Jesus and, one of the disciples, I can't remember which one was, cut off the ear of the sister, and they saw, Jesus restore the ear. I'm like, and you're still not seeing it.
Yep.
It's like you're choosing not to. I always thought that was kind of like, you would think that they would have seen it, because they saw it for themselves, but proceeded to,
well,
they did. So.
Not to spoil the ending, but whenever Jesus is on the cross and they say, let him come down from there and then we'll believe, right? Does anyone in this room think that if Jesus had come down from the cross in that moment that they would have then believed? They'd been given ample proof, and we'll see what Jesus has to say about the sign of Jonah in the coming weeks. But they'd been given ample proof. The purpose of miracles was to give validation to unverified claims that people were making. But like all things, the acceptance of an argument is subjective to a certain degree. I could stand in front of you and make a perfectly reasonable, rational, objectively true argument like the University of Tennessee has the best football program ever put on the field, but that doesn't mean that any of you are inclined to accept it, regardless of how inescapable my logic is. Now, I say that in jest, of course, but there are a number of other things whenever it comes to just objective fact that people can accept or reject. Miracles don't take away someone's ability to freely respond to what they've been given. It gives them the validation to be able to accept what logic is telling them. Now, of course, we don't need those miracles because we have the perfect that has come, the completed, inspired, and distributed New Testament. All right. Any other questions, comments?
From the first century could look at us and say, we didn't have the complete
Yeah.
Word of God, that you have, that we have.
Yeah, very good point. Yeah, if they wanted to take the back seat the way that a lot of people do today, they were lacking something that we have in an abundance, and not just us in the first century, but us in the 20th century, us in the early 21st century. The Bible is it's amazing that as access to the scriptures has become more prolific, ignorance of the scriptures has proportionately increased as well. But we have a tool that is available to us. I mean, I have 3 different bound copies of the scriptures within arm's reach of me at this moment that belong to me, ignoring the pew Bibles that we have in every pew. And I have 2 devices on my person with the scriptures in a number of languages, the vast majority of which I cannot even read, right? The scriptures and the whole purpose of miracles was to validate and verify the inspired messages that people were orally, verbally receiving at the time. But we're not hampered by that. We have objective scriptures that, it says the same thing. I might read it in a different accent than some of our brethren, up in the northern reaches of the country, but it's the same word regardless. So that's a very good point, that we cannot perform miracles, but we have something that our first century brethren were missing as well. All right. I think that rabbit is thoroughly and sufficiently chased. He'll know better than to raise his head up here again. Okay. Any other questions, comments?
My rabbit would be chasing you.
Well, be on the lookout for the white rabbit then. Let the hearer understand. All right, so verse 21, this is the rebuke that Jesus speaks. Woe to you, Chorazin! Woe to you, Bethsaida! For if the miracles that were done in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented in sackcloth and ashes long ago. But I tell you, it will be more tolerable for Tyre and Sidon on the day of judgment than for you. Now, Tyre and Sidon were some of the nearest pagan cities when the Israelites were first settling in the promised land, in the land of Canaan, in the books of Joshua and Judges. We're first introduced to Sidon in Judges chapter 1 as one of the cities that the Israelites did not drive out. And we see Tyre and Sidon playing at times a positive role in the history of Israel. Tyre and Sidon were, I guess, kind of frenemies of Israel. They were supportive at times, but they were also very detrimental, because it was the pagan gods of Tyre and Sidon that were in part what was pulling Israel away from God in the course of the history of Israel in Joshua, Judges, Ruth, Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. But for a contemporary audience to speak affirmatively of Tyre and Sidon in this way, that it would be more tolerable for Tyre and Sidon than for this present generation. Look in Isaiah chapter 23. The primary purpose of the book of Isaiah is to prepare Judah for the exile that they would experience in Babylon. But Babylon did not just come to Jerusalem and Judah and leave everyone else alone. We begin in Isaiah 23, verse 1, a pronouncement concerning Tyre. Wail, ships of Tarshish, for your haven has been destroyed. Word has reached them from the land of Cyprus. Mourn, inhabitants of the coastland, your merchants of Sidon. Your agents have crossed the sea over deep water. Tyre's revenue was the grain from Shihor, the harvest of the Nile. She was the merchant among the nations. Be ashamed, Sidon, the stronghold of the sea. For the sea has spoken, I have not been in labor or given birth. I have not raised young men or brought up young women. So the pronouncement that is being given here for Tyre and Sidon to wail, to see destruction, this is the type of judgment that is being spoken against entire peoples throughout the course of the Old Testament. And if you'll tolerate me a bit of history here, the history of Tyre in this respect is very intriguing as well. So there were actually two cities of Tyre. There was the mainland city of Tyre, and there was the offshore city of Tyre. The offshore city of Tyre was an island near the coast in the Mediterranean where the walls were built up to the very edge of the island so that if somebody wanted to siege them, there was no way to gain purchase. Nebuchadnezzar, heralded general, one we're familiar with in secular history as well as biblical history, had sieged the coastal city of Tyre so that the residents fled to the offshore city. And how long they spent there varies depending on the account, but upwards of 5 years or more. Nebuchadnezzar, I think of it in terms of Star Wars, right? Darth Maul pacing back and forth in front of the laser field, in front of Obi-Wan Kenobi, not able to approach him, not able to do anything, but kind of a stalemate of sorts there until eventually Nebuchadnezzar gave up and withdrew his armies. Now, it didn't matter so much that Tyre had survived in this way because the docks were destroyed. The ability for them to be involved in trade was hindered. Tyre, as you could imagine from its position, was heavily involved in shipping and in trade. You fast forward a few hundred years to Alexander the Great. He idolized Nebuchadnezzar in a lot of ways, but wanted to be better than Nebuchadnezzar. So he decided that he was going to really take Tyre. Like Nebuchadnezzar, he took the coastal city, but could not reach the city that had been built on the island, short distance from the coast. So he built a temporary bridge, a land bridge, just got all the stones, all the heaps and stuff from the destroyed city, piled it up in the Mediterranean to give them room to go and lay siege to the city off the coast, and really took total control of Tyre in this way. So with a historical lens, we can see these judgments and these pronouncements against Tyre and Sidon being realized and fulfilled. And to the Jews of his day, Jesus says, it will be more tolerable for them than for you. Not only that, but the histories of the people of Tyre and Sidon are even more intertwined. We know Ahab and Jezebel, right? Jezebel was not an Israelite. Jezebel was Sidonian. And Jezebel is perhaps most well known for being one of the few regents that tried to abolish the worship of Yahweh in favor of foreign deities. And in relation to Elijah, it's the priests of Baal under Jezebel that Elijah has his showdown with. They're cutting themselves, and he says, maybe he's on a long trip. Try calling a little louder. Maybe he's in the bathroom. He can't hear you. Try calling a little louder, until the offering that he makes to God is completely consumed by fire, telling the people to slaughter the priests of Baal that he confronted there. It's Jezebel that tells Elijah, may it be to me and more if you are not like one of these by this time tomorrow. And Elijah flees to the mountains and goes and tells God, I just want to die, right? That Jezebel is from Sidon. So whenever Jesus mentions Tyre and Sidon here, it may not mean a whole lot to us without that kind of background in 21st century America. But to the first century Israelites, is that the kind of comparison that you want being made for you? Can you get the door for us, John? Certainly not. So, and Isaiah 23 is just one example of the judgments that are spoken against Tyre and Sidon. There are others in the book of Jeremiah and elsewhere as well. But very clearly, he's putting them in negative company here, saying that it would be more tolerable for them than for you. Now, if Tyre and Sidon are directly responsible for pagan worship, if Tyre and Sidon are directly responsible for the Israelite people being led astray into paganism in their history, why would Jesus say that it is more tolerable for them than for this present generation? I think this is the counterpart to what he says of John and the least in the kingdom of heaven. So he lifts up John and says that the least in the kingdom of heaven would be higher. And then here he speaks of Tyre and Sidon and says, for you, it will be worse. So the fact of the matter is that Old Testament peoples there, meaning the Israelites and other nations as well, were accountable to God. Now, the people outside of Israel did not possess the law in the same way that Israel did, but they were still accountable, which is the reason why, for example, Jonah is sent to minister to prophesy to the Ninevites, the capital of Assyria. So even Tyre and Sidon and the other foreign nations that were contemporaries of ancient Israel were responsible, morally speaking, for keeping the law to the degree to which they had received it. Now, this current generation, they had being sown among them presently the seed of the new covenant, which was superior to the old. Some of these would reasonably be witnesses of the crucifixion of Jesus, to be first hand witnesses to the testimonies being given of his resurrection and the life that is offered in him. And they would still reject it. So they had the advantage of greater, superior, fuller knowledge than did the Israelites of Isaiah's day, as well as those of Tyre and Sidon. So if the least in the kingdom of heaven is vaulted above John the Baptizer, then those that reject the kingdom of heaven are placed lower than Tyre and Sidon. What we see in reading the New Testament and in reading the scriptures is that less ignorance comes with greater expectation. Does that make sense? Any questions, comments?
Definitely, even in today's world.
Even in today's world, right? This was a rationalization that Paul gave to the Romans and the Corinthians, that those that have been given revealed knowledge have a higher expectation. All right. So continuing then, verse 23, and you, Capernaum, will you be exalted to heaven? No, you will go down to Hades. For if the miracles that were done in you had been done in Sodom, it would have remained until today. But I tell you, it will be more tolerable for the land of Sodom on the day of judgment than for you. Now, obviously, we don't need the history lesson for Sodom and Gomorrah the way that we do Tyre and Sidon. That's something that we're much more familiar with. And Capernaum is where Jesus is spending the majority of his ministry, kind of triangular region with Capernaum, Galilee, and Jerusalem. And he's naming Capernaum here specifically. I do want to make a slight observation here on the word Hades. We have people that don't exactly know what to do with this word, either in translation or in interpretation. Hades is akin to the Old Testament word Sheol, which we sometimes conflate Hades and hell. Hell is explicitly associated with not just death, but with punishment, agony, negative judgment. Hades and Sheol, Hades, the Greek term, Sheol, the Hebrew term, are words that mean the realm of the dead. So I think for 21st century English, a better translation here might be the grave. So if somebody says, I'm going to take that secret to the grave, the association there with, the 6-foot hole that we're put in is more than just the final resting place of our deceased body, but it's also associated with this kind of more vague idea of the place where dead people go. And that difference is significant at times. I want to be sure and introduce it here. Elsewhere, Hades is translated as hell, and Gehenna is also translated as hell elsewhere. You kind of have to pick and choose. But so what's it matter here? What's the significance? Clearly, we are talking about judgment, but when he says that Capernaum will go down to Hades, that's to contrast heaven and life in verse 23, Hades and death. The explicit meaning of positive, negative judgment in death is not present, but the force of meaning here is that Capernaum is lacking life, that they were given the opportunity to live and that they rejected it in a way that not even Sodom would have. Okay, Mike?
I think these couple of verses are also hit on Jesus' omniscience, his ability to know the hearts of all of them.
Yeah. So there are some people that kind of the right time, the right person, the right setting is, what's needed to be able to reach them. But then there are some people that, there's nothing that you can do to reach them. So Jesus obviously is able to speak from a much more informed position in this respect than we would be able to. All right. Any other questions, comments? Anything anyone has? Rick?
Jason, the verses 22 and 24, where it talks about differing degrees of judgment. I don't want to be one of those groups, but it's interesting, and it sounds like, at least in my mind, different degrees of punishment.
Well, so in this context in particular, I think that what is in view is judgment and not necessarily the punishment associated with it, right? So if you can have a set consequence for a certain crime or error, but be more lenient with someone with mitigating circumstances before giving them that punishment. Now, what I mean there is he says specifically that it would be more tolerable, right? Not that the outcome would be more tolerable for them, but that in judgment, more tolerance would be shown for them than for Chorazin, Bethsaida, and Capernaum. Now, that's here specifically because elsewhere, the Gospel of Luke, somebody would have to check specific chapter reference for me. I feel like Luke chapter 11, but I'm very unsure on that. That Jesus says that the servant that knows and does not would be punished with more stripes than the servant that knows not and does not. Now, to your point, I don't want either of those. I don't want many stripes, and I don't want few stripes either. But I think there it's more clearly directed to the punishment received, the result of judgment, rather than the judgment itself. But the reason that we want to see both of those is because not everyone is going to be judged in the same way. We have that borne out for us elsewhere in the scriptures as well. James chapter 2, James says, "Let not many of you become teachers, because teachers" what? "Receive a stricter judgment," will incur a stricter judgment. So specifically in this context, I think that the strictness is in view, but that should be a warning and a comfort to us as well, right? That a just, merciful God is able to judge us with a just and merciful judgment, and that he knows that not all people are the same, not all people are afforded the same opportunities, but it also means that, we're the Capernaum, Chorazin, Bethsaida here of Matthew chapter 11. We are the ones that have the opportunity to know, to have things more clearly defined for us. We're not coming from a position of ignorance, but an informed position. And we need to reflect that in the choices we make and in the way that we live as well. I think that was relevant to what you said.
I just had a vision in my mind of being in the oven at 125 degrees Fahrenheit as opposed to 450.
Or 450 versus 850, right? Neither one is desirable. Okay. Any other questions, comments, observations, smart marks, anything, Andy?
There is today, here and now, we need to believe the gospel and obey the gospel. It's more tolerable for a well-known awful place like Sodom, but it's more tolerable for them than us. If we
Yeah.
obey.
Yeah.
We're in a nice air-conditioned church. Somebody can explain the gospel to us in a nice, fair way. Let's obey.
We've got a much higher standard because we have far less ignorance. Yeah. All right. Well, we'll pick up next week then in Matthew chapter 11 and verse 25. And thank you all so much for your participation and attention this morning.